our rebroadcast tonight. And we had talked about the band Blondie.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay asked if Debbie Harry even wrote anything. And I said I didn't know. John said he thought she did.
She did.
I watched a show on HBO Max called Blondie's New York. And it was basically the making of Parallel Lines. They were talking about, how that came together. And she wrote like those lyrics. Blondie's the lyricist.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
I didn't know.
it was interesting. They were talking about the song One Way or Another.
Love
and
that
she
song.
actually wrote it about somebody who was stalking her. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's about a stalker.
Whoa.
One way or another, I'm going to find you. I'm going to get you. Yeah. And apparently the stalker's name was Howie Darkstar. He was one of the sound guys over at CBG.
Yeah.
I heard it was Sting.
It was,
And then he wrote your take.
that was
I'll
so
be watching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every movie you
They
make.
asked me, they go, "You're so quiet. Are you a stalker?"
Cause and effect.
No, I'm just sounding like that. That's all.
Well, she wrote a song about you, apparently. So anyway, Howie's here, Jay's here, John's here.
Hey.
We're all here, just like last time.
Yeah.
And before we kick off these shows, we like to do something we like to call. We need a sound effect here.
Yeah. Boston John's
like a little
record roundup.
Boston John's record roundup. We need some kind of theme music for that.
Boston John's.
How we get on that? That's for next week.
Yeah.
We need theme music for that. Maybe a little jingle.
Yeah.
Write a
something.
song for it, like Debbie Harry.
Okay.
So who would like to go first?
Well, it's Boston John. I think
I can start us off.
John can kick it off. Yeah.
I got one because we talked about something the other week and it made me think of this unreleased track that didn't show up on a record. And I said, what you probably need to get is the very first. Now that's what I call music.
Ooh, with You Can't Hurry Love is the first song.
Yeah. The double of the gatefold sleeve. And it had, because we talked about Duran Duran, Is There Something I Should Know? Made it to this record. And these are still in production today. Obviously now the Now series is up in the 140s or 50s or whatever. But the very first one,
it depends on what side of the pond you're on, right?
I guess. This is the British one.
Oh, yeah. There's British Nows and there's the American Nows that came out in the late 90s.
Right.
They started hitting.
Yeah. So it was a nice compilation to get a sampler pack. And this is kind of like the early, what would be to today's equation of a Spotify playlist. You have, there are 30 tracks, 11 number ones, all different artists, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Everything from Genesis to Men at Work to Rod Stewart to Heaven 17, Casey and the Sunshine Band.
Oh yeah, it's the English one.
So if you get any interest in keeping up with what's fresh and hot on today's countdown, the Now series, and now that's what I call music. So,
1984.
This was 5.
Was it 5 that came out? I thought it was 84.
I'm sorry. I'm even wrong. 3.
83.
Virgin Records,
Both wrong.
1983.
I remember the ones in the 90s. We would buy them because they were edited, and you'd get like a Britney song, a Christina song.
Yeah.
It was worth the money to buy.
When after Stevie's mom and I split up, I got into collecting the British Nows, and I have a lot of them. Like I got a glass case full of the British ones. They're double disc, and there was so much stuff on there that I'd never heard before. And I went back. I was like buying them off of eBay and such, getting the old stuff and getting the new ones as they would come out. Oh my gosh, just amazing stuff. And I ripped them in. I still play that stuff at gigs. Like there's certain versions of things and edits of things off of the Nows that I like better than what I got domestically, even my promo stuff.
This might have been the first time that I discovered this, like the Cure was on here. I think I found them there. Culture Club Victims. It was just, it opens doors and you're kind of like, oh, this is catchy. What else do they do? Then you go back to the record store and you start, looking them up alphabetically. But it's a nice, easy way to get a bunch of stuff that's rated high that is going to, either you'll be able to use it somewhere. It's all usable.
It's a classic, John. Good pick.
So
cool
pick. That's my pick of the week.
UK Now. That's what I call it.
Yeah, they just call it Now. One. There's no volume because
it's the. They know they're going to do another one. Yeah, they're in the hundreds now. It's crazy. And they have now. That's what I call Christmas. Now that's what I call a wedding.
Yep.
Now that's what I call 80s. Now that's what I call.
You name it. Yacht Rock.
They're all out there. Or whatever. I don't know. They got all kinds of them.
They're all out there. So,
who's next?
I'll go.
Go.
That's why I have my glasses on so that I could read this small print. I did something different this time. And I thought instead of me picking something, I would go to a younger person. Okay.
Somebody in their mid 60s.
No. Somewhere in there.
I mean, they're still AARP, but they are young.
To protect their anonymity, they're somewhere around, 20-ish or 30-ish,
Sure.
plus or minus a couple of years either way. And I thought, hey, what new things are you listening to? I'm just like trying to like everybody's saying new music sucks, and I thought, let's ask a young person. Guess what they picked? They picked Outkast, Stankonia, that album. And
which one is that? Is that the one?
It's the one that has, and she actually picked her favorite song. She picked her favorite song as Ms. Jackson.
Ms. Jackson. Okay.
And So Fresh, So Clean.
Yep,
but it also has B.O.B. on it, Bombs Over Baghdad.
Oh, yeah. I love that song.
They have like hit after hit with this album. And that was her pick for an album. And I thought that was quite interesting.
It's a good album.
Yeah, it is. But as a young person, that album, they're
22 years old?
22 at least, right? It came out in 2000 or so, right?
2000, 2001. I know a Record Box or Speaker Box and Love Below, which was their double album, came out in, I think, 2002 or 2003. 2003, probably. So that was a year or two before that. And it was big.
Didn't that have Hey Ya on it?
Hey Ya was on Speaker Box.
And that's the one they won the Grammy for, right?
Yeah, the Speaker Box was Andre 3000s or 2000 or whatever. And then Big Boy did The Love Below. So The Way You Move was on The Love Below. And then Hey Ya was on Speaker Box.
So anyway, I tried to get new music, but I guess they're not having it.
It's relatively new.
Can you divulge the source who picked it? Or
no, he's not going to say.
I won't say.
Okay.
He said younger, and it's probably Clint Eastwood or something.
It could be, yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
Say what he got.
Yeah.
I am going back to the 70s.
All right.
To what I think is in my top 5 favorite live albums. And I think this is a good live example of the band, but I also think it's a playlist. There's 14 songs of which there's maybe one most fans don't know. The other 13 songs you know. And it culminates in a, I think, 9-minute or 10-minute, 11-minute and 30-second ending to the last track. Last track being Freebird, and being Leonard Skinner.
It's in 11 minutes.
Yeah, and album being One More from the Road. And it's not their last album. They still put out 2 more albums before they had the tragic plane crash. But Searching was the one track on it that, I like the track, but it's not in their big thing. Working for MCA, I Ain't the One, Tuesday's Gone, Sweet Home Alabama, Call Me the Breeze, Needle in the Spoon, Freebird, Give Me 3 Steps, Whiskey Rock and Roller, Saturday Night Special. They're all just bangers.
Sure.
And it's done really well. And I'm sure if I look it up, I can find out that it's actually not live like everything else, and it was all studioed. And I kind of hate that because it's a really good live, I think, example of the band and that period of time. And they were tight. They were a good physical playing band. 3 guitar players, great lead singer, good rhythm section, great keyboard player. There was a lot of people on stage.
The
3
current lineup
background
is really
singers.
good too.
The what?
The current lineup is really good too. I heard them at Welcome to Rockville last year, and the current lineup was like the last act to go on the main stage.
Yeah.
And Metallica was there. Rob Zombie was there. Slipknot was there. There were tons of bands there that were, are quite famous and could easily hold their own. But Leonard Skinner was the final act to go on stage.
Yeah.
And they were good. Like they headlined for everybody on the 48 Festival, and they were really good.
They have a good lineup. They've gone through a lot of changes, obviously, over the years. There's only one original member left, Gary Rosington. They even at one point for a number of years had Huey Thomason, the old lead singer of the Outlaws, played guitar for him. Ricky Medlock, the old lead singer of Blackfoot, he was actually a drummer with Skinner before they got signed, then came back in, the late 80s, I think, early 90s.
All of that.
Whenever they came back, he became one of the three guitarists. But yeah, I mean, they're slugging away.
That whole Southern rock thing, the Skinner and Outlaws and Blackfoot and Rosalton Collins, they were all in each other's bands. I mean, it was it was all interchangeable, It
really was. It really was. And it's one of those things where they hit, Skinner obviously in the 70s, all those bands started pretty much in the 70s, 60s, very late 60s maybe for Allman Brothers. But that was a movement. And at least where I grew up on the East Coast, it was a big thing. Like, you heard a lot of Southern rock up north.
It was played everywhere, dude.
Yeah.
It was played everywhere.
Oh, yeah. No, I have no doubts. But, I can only speak to where I was at the time. And I just know that, it was a big deal. Skinner was a big deal. Charlie Daniels. Yeah. These were all people playing, the Garden.
I had it in my head that Southern rock was very white, very Southern, very, testosterone, heterosexual, kind of aggressive angst music, even for older people. This is what I had in my head. But that gay wedding I did, the big songs were Sweet Home Alabama and Ram Jam, Black Betty.
Really?
So it spans,
Wow.
Yeah.
I've had really good responses from all kinds of different audiences, races, colors, creeds. Sweet Home Alabama, they get up to it.
Well, it's funny because I've seen interviews with Skinner and Charlie Daniels, and that wasn't who they were. Ronnie Van Zant put Curtis Blow, I think it's on the second album, and it's about this black dude that lived down the street from him when he was real little. And he played guitar, and that was the guy that influenced Ronnie. So he had no time for racism. And Charlie Daniels was very
about the audience itself, yeah.
Oh yeah, but I think
your point,
I think the bands can dictate the audience sometimes. They can kind of bring the audience along for the ride. And I think they were always kind of no, this is all of us together. We're all inclusive.
Right.
Because I definitely think there are bands that you go to a show and you're like, wow, I don't see anyone else here, kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
But there's mine for this week.
Nice, good one. I'm gonna cheat this week and do a greatest hits. And the reason I'm gonna do this one is because, and perhaps I'm very uneducated, but there are a lot of artists where the greatest hits is almost not what I'd recommend because the albums themselves are like works that are very carefully arranged, and the songs maybe sometimes tell a story. It's a bit like DJing. You put things in an order that you want them to be in. And the artists do that on albums a lot. But sometimes there are artists that just have really good hits and you should know them. And I'm going to go with Little River Band's greatest hits. Of all things, I feel like you should check that out.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I own a Little River Band album that's not a greatest hits album. I have the greatest hits, but not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much cool stuff to listen to. There's all kinds of different.
It really is. Yeah.
And Cool Change, Lonesome Loser, Reminiscing.
Great songs.
Man on Your Mind. It's all there. So if you're not familiar with Little River Band, they're really good. Kind of a shout out to our friend Scrappa because he lives down there and he's some kind of Australian diplomat, I guess. I don't know.
That's what I've heard.
He owns like
one
in
anyway.
Australia by now. Yeah. And thoughts and prayers to John Farnham too, because he's trying to say some stuff. So
apparently, and I was informed of that last night. Yeah. So the lead singer is going through some cancer stuff now, but it's good. Check it out. It's music you should probably know, and you'll be able to use it once in a while, even as a DJ. But just for your listening pleasure, check this stuff out. This is good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's what this whole thing is. I think every time we bring up a record, I do it as a way of saying, yeah, obviously I like it or I wouldn't bring it up. But I also think it's, everything we brought up tonight would be refreshing to anybody, DJ or not.
Yeah.
To at least go out and say, hey, you know what? I've heard Freebird, but I don't know much else. Well, here's 13 other tracks. Oh, man, I like 9 of them. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Here's Little River Band. I think I know Reminiscing.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know they did Cool Change. Oh, I didn't know they did Lonesome Loser. Oh, I love this guitar work.
I tell you what's weird about Little River Band for me personally. I had no time for them when they were contemporary. Like,
I'm sure.
Because I was alive during their career. I didn't have time for them because I was listening to other things. But now that I'm older, I'm taking time for them and I'm listening to them with almost fresh ears because all the noise is blocked out from what I was into at the time. I've absorbed all that other stuff. Now I'm going to go back and listen to the stuff I missed the first time around.
Well, there you go.
I didn't pay that much attention to. And Little River Band is one of those groups that I'm checking out.
They, I didn't play them the other night, but they are in the same category with me as Jerry Rafferty, Baker Street, Al Stewart, Year of the Cat. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because they all had one common thread, and that is at some point, there's like a short but really good guitar solo. Mm-hmm. Even though it's considered a very mellow piece, Little River Band had 3 guitar players, one of them left-handed.
Yeah.
And they always, every time I would see them on like Don Kirshner's rock concert or Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special or something, they would always dabble in a little bit of a guitar solo somewhere.
I think
and
like
as someone that loved guitar, it really was like, Jerry Rafferty, Baker Street's got a great solo. Year of the Cat by Al Stewart has a great solo. And a bunch of Little River Band songs, to me, have great little guitar solos in them. So it was a prelude of rock to me in a way.
I always kind of dismiss them as the Australian Eagles, but
that works.
They're more than that, I think. There's more to it. It's something else that I found really interesting. And just, I'm observing this. I never paid attention before. I think every band member sang harmony.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know many bands that do that.
Yeah.
Def Leppard.
Summer.
All of them sing harmony?
Yeah. Everybody in Def Leppard sings.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah.
Every single member has a live mic and they sing.
Yeah.
And like you say, there are not many bands. And I've heard Phil Collin, the guitarist, a solo just on acoustic, do Pour Some Sugar, and you think it's Joe Elliott. Their voices are really, it's sort of like I have to bring up a band. I know I'm going to get flack for this. Mm-hmm. But if you wanted to talk about voices that are similar, you should hear The Edge from U2 sing. Oh. He sounds a lot like Bono. So their voices melt very well versus, let's say, Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, whose voices are really polar opposite. But in harmony, I thought Alice in Chains had some of the best harmonies going. Because their voices were so polar opposite. You
could probably make that same argument with Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins in the early days.
Or their example of doing Take Me Home, the long version that Peter Gabriel sings on. And the harmonies are Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins.
Yeah, there's
vocal harmony's been around since the days of Beatles and Everly Brothers. I mean, there was some amazing stuff going.
Well, and just
my grandfather was into Ink Spots. That was his thing. And that was all
that doo-wop period, all harmonies.
Oh, that
look at Squeeze.
Pre-doo-wop.
The song "Cool for Cats" by Squeeze?
Yeah,
that's Chris Difford singing. Glenn Tilbrook is the lead singer, even though Chris Difford, the guy that sings "Cool for Cats," wrote all the lyrics, and Glenn Tilbrook, the lead singer, wrote all the music. It was one of those, Rush, where Neil Peart wrote all the lyrics, and Geddy and Alex wrote all the music.
Yeah,
right.
Toppin and John.
Speaking of harmonies, I'm trying to think of the most interesting use of the human voice in song.
Oh, Yoko Ono?
Yeah, I was thinking of Yoko.
Like beatboxing, I think is pretty interesting. I'm not into it, but it's fascinating to me.
I'm talking about just crazy harmonies and stuff. And I'm going
to throat singing. There you go. Listen.
I'm going to have to give it to Tennessee with "I'm Not in Love."
Oh, yeah. Decades ahead of themselves in their ability to take 635 voices.
Mm-hmm.
It's something crazy like
all
that.
in different notes. And they just used, everybody had 3 faders they played with to create. Oh, it was like listening to somebody play a Fairlight in 1976.
Yeah. It's its own instrument at that point.
Beautiful.
Completely.
You don't know what I'm talking about. There's a YouTube video on this. Have a look at it. The making of 10cc.
It's a great video.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, guys.
It's an eye opener. But I love the fact that just like so many great hits are happy mistake things or little touches, they go out to the receptionist and they go, "Hey, can you come in for a second? We need you to whisper."
Right. We need a female voice, very soft. And
okay. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Or, what was it? Gimme Shelter, where the woman's at home with her hair in curls. They bring her in the studio and one hit, done.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm saying this up front. I'm not a huge fan of his. I'm a bigger fan today than I was yesterday, and that is Bruce Springsteen.
I knew you were going to say Bruce. Yeah.
He did an interview with Howard Stern yesterday, and to hear him talk about these iconic tracks as, "Oh yeah, I wrote this down the beach in like 5 minutes because I had a rhyming dictionary. I was down, in Ocean City, and I went to the beach and I wrote Thunder Road. And then I wrote Blinded by the Light with a rhyming dictionary." And they're like, "Yeah, but you didn't have a big hit with that." He goes, "Yeah, I didn't, and I couldn't have." He goes, Manfred Mann had the hit with that. The Pointer Sisters had the hit with
Fire.
it. Patti Smith had the hit with Blinded by the Light. He just went through all these tracks. But he was so self-effacing, like, "Oh, yeah, no, this I wrote like a hymn. That's why it does this and this. And this is just because I thought of this." And Howard Stern's like, "So this is just nonsense." He's like, "Oh yeah, Blinded by the Light is not." There's nothing going on. I was just trying to rhyme stuff. He's like revved up like a deuce.
It was revved up like no.
Revved up.
All loose like a goose was Springsteen.
Revved up like a deuce.
Revved up like a deuce was Manfred Mann.
Car. It's a car.
Right.
A deuce.
That's what Manfred Mann sang, but Springsteen didn't sing those lyrics. Springsteen sang.
I thought he said wrapped up.
All loose like a goose. But Manfred Mann says revved up like a deuce. If you listen to him, Springsteen says all loose like a goose.
Oh, yesterday when he did his, he's like wrapped up. I swear, I can go back and listen.
Jersey was huge at the time. Everybody had a hopped up car. Everybody.
But that was the thing. He's just like, this was just nonsense. Really? It's like, no, and I wrote this. I mean, and it's so poignant. He played a song about dying in the hotel room when Clarence Clemens passed away. He had his guitar and he just decided to start playing.
Huh.
I mean, like, you can't make this stuff up.
Oh, if you just pull stuff out, pull content out of thin air like that, that's
and just be like, here, I wrote it like a hymn for church. See the way I did this and this and this. And Howard Stern, in my opinion, is one of the greatest interviewers of our time. I challenge you to get your hands on the audio of him talking to Bruce Springsteen for an hour plus. And let me tell you, you walk away, it's devastating.
Well, it's on the XM app. All you got to do is
I'll
check it out.
Fun.
Sure.
I think you'll walk away with your head shaking, Brian, because I was like,
probably even a video of it because they video a lot of that.
And put it this way, he has not been in his studio in 2.5 years.
Then they're not videoing it probably then.
No. He came into the studio. It was Bruce and Howard. No one else. Because Howard's so paranoid about getting COVID.
Right.
That he actually, and Bruce said, "I think it'd be cool if we sat in the studio." And Howard's like, "Yeah, I'll go."
Huh.
2.5 years. And he made it. But I don't,
I'll check it out for sure.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Isn't it interesting though, when there are people, celebrities, actors, singers, artists, maybe we don't like their product, but then when you get to know the actual person themselves, you like them.
Yeah.
There's a couple for me like that.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is Dave Grohl. I don't care for Nirvana, really. I don't care for Foo Fighters, but I like him.
It's shocking you don't. Well, I know why you don't like Foo Fighters. To me, is not a Brian. Like, I would pass if you said, "Oh, want to buy this for Brian?" I'd be like, he's not going to like Foo Fighters. It's almost too simplistic, or it's not his style. It's not funky enough.
It's not bad, but there's not anything that Foo Fighters is doing that I can think of that's an earworm. Like Nirvana had earworms, but Foo Fighters doesn't have those types of earworms to me. But I like Dave Grohl. And the other one is Randy Newman. I don't like any Randy Newman music, but I like him. I think he's a neat guy. And
but isn't there music
is that way for me?
Right. And I never had anything against Bruce. And I had some roommates that would go see him a couple times a year, and they were phenomenally into him. 3-hour shows, you got to go. But I'm the guy that wants to see a guitar solo. And, Tunnel of Love is the only track that comes to mind that there's guitar solo in all of Bruce's catalog. So for me, it was never like, he was on the side of the street with Bob Seger and Tom Petty and, acts like that where it's like, here's a song, John Cougar, here's a song and it's rock, but it's a little deeper lyrically. But I certainly now have a new appreciation for his ability to be so vulnerable and real. Because I think there's some, like, if I see one more Nikki Sixx interview where Nikki acts like he's God's gift to the world, I'm going to choke somebody. Dude, your stuff is too easy to play to be that much of an attitude. I think Dave Grohl tries at least to be the everyday guy, and he's a fan, and he's shown that by doing different projects. But I think, in my opinion, the only sustainable rock band, and I said this before Taylor Hawkins died, that you could see doing stadiums down the road would be Foo Fighters.
Oh, they're incredibly popular. I'm just not feeling it.
And Dave has a love for all music too. He'll perform with Nancy Wilson. He just said he was in a photo with King Diamond, and so I went to see him.
He did an album with King Diamond, and he did that Probot.
He did the Probot thing. Yeah, he wrote the music "Sweet Dreams." He sent it to King and asked him to pen the lyrics, and it came back to him as a completed song. He was like, yeah, because he's fanboying a little bit, I
totally respect him and his band. And if he is playing alongside somebody, I'm paying attention. But I love watching him drum.
Yeah.
Love watching him drum. What was it? He was on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and he was up on drums. Was it for Ringo Starr? Yeah, it was. I think it was for Ringo Starr. He was doing drums. And Paul McCartney was down with, off the drum platform playing bass, I believe, to I Want to Be Your Man. I think that's what it was. And Dave
could have been. Yeah.
It was really good.
All right, he played for Rush as well.
Yeah.
And that really that movie about Studio Sunset Studio.
666.
Well, that's I haven't seen that yet. I want to see it too.
Yeah, the kids made me watch it this weekend.
How was it?
Oh,
I hear
it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you like Dave Grohl or the Foo Fighters, and
Kerry King from Slayer's in it too.
Very much lip service to the fans. Okay. I had no idea who it was. Like, what the hell are we watching? I thought it was a horror movie. That's so stupid. If you know them, it's funny.
Yeah, I hear it's like a real takeoff.
I'm laughing at it. I kind of sort of fell asleep right at the end because I'd had enough, but it was cute.
Yeah.
The kids liked it.
It can't be like a Spinal Tap, right? Kind of just like it's horror, but we're just having fun and right. And
like the death scenes, they said were really gory because they tried to make them all up funny. Yeah. Like, how can we possibly kill Taylor? How can we kill, Dave? How can we kill this one?
By the way.
Yeah, I know. But they were on Howard Stern doing the interview about it. And like, there's this thing with a symbol, this and that. You got to see it, Howard. It's awesome. And like, really? They're like, it's like a takeoff on all those gore movies from the 70s.
Yeah, it is. It's
all
silly.
But you mentioned Paul McCartney and Dave Grohl in the same sentence. You know that they got together, that Sunset Studio.
Oh,
but they ended up doing a couple of songs. And Paul came in and said, hey, why don't we play with Chris and let's get Pat Smear? So what you have there, for all intents and purposes, is 3 of the 4 members of Nirvana with Paul McCartney singing. And there was talk after they did it that this would be a project that Paul was going to do. And it was going to more or less be the new Nirvana. There's a great soundtrack to, I think it's called Sound City. And it's the famous Neve board that is in Studio 606 at Dave's house. He bought it. But the movie documents the history of the Neve board.
Right.
And who recorded on it. Like everybody.
Rumor's album. And
everything. Yeah. But at the very end of it, in Dave's studio with the Neve board, they do a track with Trent Reznor on keys, Josh Homme on bass, and Dave Grohl on drums.
Yeah.
I think it's called.
And I would watch that and enjoy it.
Oh, you would love it.
I would love it.
The Paul McCartney shows up and literally he goes in seconds. He's like, well, let's do this. Let's try these chords and give me a pen. And Paul's writing out lyrics.
I've seen them do things before, and it looks like that those two have a chemistry and a rhythm together.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. I guess
if we met him, we could jam with him. I genuinely believe Dave Grohl had nothing else to do that day. And I said, hey, I play guitar and Brian can play bass and Howie's on keys and John plays, I think he'd be like, yeah, let's jam. What do you want to play? Let's play some old Stones.
Concert all the time. Yeah. He brings people up from the audience on stage. Like he brought that 7-year-old girl up and she killed it, and it made her, that's something she'll remember the rest of her life. He had fun.
The English girl?
Or the drummer girl, Nadia.
The drummer girl, right? Nadia?
Yeah.
Nadia Bushnell.
Nadia, I think it was. Yeah, she got up and played a song.
Kid that played guitar with him. He's just a nice guy. Like, okay, you're good in my show. Come on up and play,
Yeah. Well, Bruce, apparently, I don't like him as much as that too. He'll take requests. Like if you hold up a sign that says, "Can you play Gimme Shelter?" Yeah. He'll go, "Oh, Gimme Shelter," because Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine is a huge Springsteen fan, and he has played with the band on stage like 20 times. And they asked him, like, "What impresses you about the band?" He goes, "The band must know 10,000 songs." And they can fall in and out of pockets. Bruce will literally turn around where the sheet says, "We're playing Thunder Road," and Bruce will turn around and go like, "Good golly, Miss Molly." And he goes, it's not even a blink. And the entire band starts playing Good golly, Miss Molly.
Changing all the keys. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's like, but I think that's gone away. There was a band recently that couldn't go on because they couldn't get their laptops. And their laptops have all their backing tracks and their fills. So the band canceled their show. I mean, they're playing in front of like 4,000 or 5,000 fans. And they played the next night, like, we're really sorry about that. But they got a lot of heat. And Rick Beato even did a video about it.
Yeah.
And he's like, the problem today is when I produce a band, if there's keys and they don't bring a keyboardist out, we'll make them a backing track.
Backing track.
The problem is, bands have gone to the next level of, actually, the vocals on this are really good. Can you add that stem? Can you add this drum part?
Right.
So they're more or less playing to their own click track on stage.
Yeah. Right. But it's all added MIDI. And if you don't have the laptop there, then you're missing the whole section of the song. That's like,
how about you just get on stage like ZZ Top and the Stones and everyone else who have never had a backing track, and you plug in and you just simply shut up and play. So Neil Young, no backing tracks. Stones, no backing tracks.
Most every band before 20 years ago, no backing track. Most.
Exactly.
Most.
No, it was them.
So,
and if they had it to enhance it, that's fine. You don't have a keyboardist, bring a backing track.
We got about 20 minutes left, and there's a couple things I wanted to cover in the show before we wrap it.
So, I know that was a great opening segment, huh?
Yeah.
This is still rolling on 40 minutes in.
Schedule opening albums 5 minutes. Cross out 40 minutes.
Wait, Jay's here, John's here.
Oh, geez.
It's going to run a little longer than that. It's going to be half a show.
So it's been confirmed. It came up and then it went away and then it came up again. Jerry Lee Lewis died on Friday. There was a fake out on Wednesday. TMZ reported he was dead, and then his manager said, no, he's alive and well. And then by Friday, he was dead.
Yeah.
I have a confession to make. I didn't realize he was still alive.
I don't think you're alone.
And I haven't played a Jerry Lee Lewis song at one of my gigs in a long time.
Can you name more than one song by Jerry Lee Lewis?
Chantilly Lace? No, that was Big Bopper.
That's Big Bopper.
That's Big Bopper. What am I saying?
So no. Whole lot of shaking going on. So the answer is no.
Whole lot of shaking going on.
Okay, and Great Balls of Fire.
And Great Balls of Fire is
Balls of Fire.
And
I've go for the triple play.
Of them, but I never was a boogie woogie piano dude. I'm just not that guy.
And he gets played when you get that grandma that requests some 50s rock and roll.
My mother's best friend.
No, she's dead by now, Jay.
My mother's best friend in the world.
Yes.
And her best friend is like family to me. And her son is like my cousin, Her husband's favorite of all time was Jerry Lee Lewis. Like that was his guy. And like some people are into Elvis, some people are into whatever. But
Little
Jerry
Richard
Lee Lewis was this guy. It's the only person I've ever met who was like a mega Jerry Lee Lewis fan.
There always has to be one.
Even like when I was DJing in the 80s, I remember Like the only time I played Jerry Lee Lewis is when I had a crowd that wanted a lot of 50s. And seeing how the songs are all 2 minutes long, you need a lot of songs.
Oh, you do.
It's like 30 songs per hour you have to play
100%.
to fill a 50s sock hop thing.
Yeah.
So then you play him. But if you're only doing 15 minutes of 50s, you're not playing them.
No.
I'm not anyway. Am I alone on that?
Because there's better choices,
Exactly.
Right.
He's guilty by association of being there in the beginning. He's one of the famous Sun Studio picture, Sun City Studio picture.
Mm-hmm.
Sun Records. I'm sorry, Sun Records.
City. Yeah, South African artist, Jerry Lee Lewis.
I was trying to make this an international show, Brian. I like to appeal to every country I can.
So pick South Africa in the 50s. Very inclusive.
Yeah. And they had Sun Records. Or not. But there's that famous photo, I think, of like Elvis, him, and I want to say Little Richard. That all recorded in that studio.
Huh.
And by side note, for what it's worth, Lemmy of Metallica and Dave Grohl, 6 Degrees of Separation back to Dave Grohl, both are on record saying that the greatest rock and roll singer, bar none of all time, is Little Richard.
I'll give him that.
You wouldn't even argue with Lemmy. Lemmy's like, Little Richard has the greatest voice of a singer, period, end of subject.
Yeah, I'll give him that.
Most range, most color. Yeah, he could jump around.
Attitude.
And he rightfully so in his documentary said, can you imagine being Little Richard, a gay black man in the 50s down south singing rock and roll? Like, talk about the deck stacked against
right.
Like,
no kidding. Tough,
like there's no one to call up and be like, how did you get through it? There is no one. You are a trailblazer, my friend.
Right.
Yeah,
Sure, for sure.
Have bulletproof vests back then.
By the way, stupid question, but I might as well ask: is he still alive?
No,
he passed.
No,
we
did
lost
pass.
him a while back.
he's still dead. Yeah.
Him and Francisco Franco.
Yeah.
This just in: Francisco Franco still dead.
Now just thinking about people like Little Richard. I mean, he was very much a has-been by the time I was around. And that wasn't, I mean, what was it, the 50s? And that was it for Little Richard.
But he's still a go-to for the 50s, more so than Jerry Lee Lewis. I would play Bill Haley. I would play Little Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Elvis.
Right past.
Well, let's do the math here. I'm just, because I've never done this before, and it just occurred to me. So let's assume, what was he in 1955? Was he 20?
Probably.
21? Let's just pretend he was 20. I don't know how old he was. Let's pretend he was 20 years old. So he'd have been 30 in 1965. He'd have been 40 in 1975. He'd have been 50 in 1985. Right? So my age in 1955.
Right.
Remember the movie Down and Out in Beverly Hills?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was their neighbor across the street. And they never said his name, but it was him in his clothes, in his whole persona, who would come over and complain about the noise all the time. Then he ended up playing at their Thanksgiving party or something. I don't know. But it was suggested in the movie, and it was true that he was a rock star of the past at 50 with that much charisma.
Yeah.
And think of what Prince was doing at 50.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, there's no way you can have this talk without mentioning Prince.
No, but I mean, he was a
trailblazer.
Absolutely. I'm not arguing.
Oh, would you have Prince?
It burned hot
Prince's
and
performance without that?
It burned hot and not for very long, is all I'm saying.
Oh, but I think because the 60s changed so dramatically.
Yeah, the music changed.
Plus, it was the first time. It was the first time in recorded history when you think about it. Just because Rosemary Clooney was making hits didn't preclude anyone else from being popular. You take the 50s artists, when the Beatles came out, they sort of changed the landscape of music so much, and they were so influenced by those guys that they sort of put them on the back burner. Like it wasn't, because now you had this whole new movement of music that was influenced from that.
I got a cool idea on how to burn the rest of our time. Maybe this will only be a 2-minute conversation.
I doubt that.
What artists survived the 50s and went on for success in the 60s and beyond? Like real.
I mean, obviously Elvis.
After a pause, he came back.
He had his big
came back in 68.
Yeah, the big comeback. Yeah.
Now
Everly Brothers were pretty good in the 60s.
Well, did they do anything in the 50s? Did they go back to the 50s?
Yes.
Okay.
Everly Brothers,
I was thinking the Four Seasons.
Four Seasons, Frankie Valli for sure.
That's a great one.
In the late 50s.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one.
I was also thinking Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
Cliff Richard's another one.
He's been around forever.
And he's just doing a new Christmas album, which I guess they're not very happy about because he's going to go for that Christmas #1 to do that 8-decade deal. But good for him.
It's 8 decades? Holy shit.
He's had a #1 hit in the UK for 8 decades straight.
How old is he? 120?
Oh my. I was going to say, he's got to be over $1.
I'll have what he's having.
He might be a vampire. I'm going to be honest.
I bet
he might be a vampire.
70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and now. That's 8.
The 20s. Yeah.
Well,
I saw a picture of him with Beethoven. I'm just saying, he's old.
No, but we
sketch.
talked about this once before about Paul McCartney had, whether he was in a band or not, had a #1 hit in 7 different decades.
Yeah.
We're there, yeah.
Yeah. All day.
And he just missed the 50s, so.
I think the 50s were a time of change and influence. And then the 60s went and took it to a whole nother level. Well, and then you look at the dramatic drop of the 70s. The 70s almost fell off a cliff in the beginning and then had to ramp back up.
I've thought about this a lot. And I think that what happened, the abrupt thing that happened was the plane crash with Buddy Holly and Big Bopper on him. That was the thing that changed everything.
Balance, yeah.
Oh, I agree.
So then the Beatles hit the scene eventually, and that changed everything. And then, oh boy,
you had that 3-year period at the end of the 60s where you had Hendrix and the Doors and Joplin and Monterey and Woodstock, and then Altamont. And Altamont is the plane crash of Buddy Holly, Big Bopper. It's almost like every decade had to have that famous drop. And there's an argument to be made with Led Zeppelin that John Bonham dying in 1980 kind of killed off that style rock for a bit because the 80s rock went completely different.
I think what happened there was the whole Kaminsky Park thing with the Disco Sucks.
That's another plane crash. Another plane crash.
Rock, if rock had a beat to it, that was okay then because dance music and R&B music was still very much in demand, even though disco sucks in America was now the new catchphrase. So rock was almost forced to kind of fill that gap that disco was, taking care of. But now that's a dirty word. We can't do disco anymore.
Right.
So that really screwed things around for a minute. And then it corrected itself. It did auto-correct a couple years later because Ozzy's doing things and Metallica's doing things and Aldo Nova, and it's getting more and more rock. And Metallica did a lot for that. Metallica was just like, no, we're not using keyboards. We're not doing that. We're not wearing makeup. We're not doing that.
Yeah, we're going
to and they had contemporaries, hence why you have the big four that toured a couple years back with Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. And Anthrax is still out doing things today. They just put out new product and they just toured.
I want the audience to know that I'm riffing on this. I could be wrong on a lot of this. I'm going off memory.
Pantera is still touring. They played at the Stone Pony this summer. The outdoor,
Pantera
-2. It's the new version of Pantera. They
already did a gig this summer.
Yeah,
I didn't think they was. They only announced that Charlie
Benante from Anthrax is drums.
Charlie Benante from Anthrax and Zakk Wylde. I didn't think they were talking not doing anything until 2023. I didn't know they actually did a gig.
Well, I guess it was like a practice thing because it only holds like 1,000 people, the outdoor,
Oh, wow.
It's kind of like
I got to look that up.
Kind of like Beret. The Stone Pony is small inside, but the outside, they have an outside.
Oh, they have a big outside stage.
It makes sense. Yeah. A couple of practice runs under the belt before.
No. You got to do the unannounced step. Well, look at the Stones. Every time the Stones would tour, they always started in Boston, and they would do 1,000, then Orpheum, then the Garden, and then their tour would start. They've played. It's notorious and celebrated the history of the Stones in Boston, playing little clubs, then a bigger club, theater to get their tour started, to get the kinks out.
Yeah, U2 did that too. U2 launched in Boston, and that they played a small, like the Paradise.
They played the Paradise
Garden, and then
you know what? They opened for Someone in the Somebodies because John Coe, the drummer's a buddy of mine. John Coe did a story in Sweet Potato about U2. Their very first American show was at the Paradise. A year later, U2 does a bigger tour, like Orpheum size. They called John Coe and say, we want your band to open up for us on the East Coast run as a thank you. Seriously, like that's an absolute true story.
That's looking at.
It's really easy for us to like, you know, take a couple different forks and enjoy the ride. But I did want to go back to my original question.
We're like a silverware drawer. What do you mean forks?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Yes, I do like cilantro. Was that the question?
Who else survived the 50s?
Oh, yeah.
Chuck Berry survived the 50s.
Oh,
Chuck Berry did. But he became like a guy on Mike Douglas.
Said Willie Nelson. That's true. Willie was.
You're right.
He had a tie and short hair in the.
Oh yeah.
Well, wait a minute though. He was a writer back then with like Patsy Cline and stuff.
But he performed too. There's old black and whites of him performing.
Okay, so he was legit performing in. Okay,
yeah, he were crazy, right?
Then I think you have to look at Johnny Cash. He's not alive now, but you got to include him.
Yeah,
Johnny Cash was around in the 50s.
You're right.
Damn.
Right. And still relevant.
Somebody else I just thought of
to the 90s.
Frank Sinatra survived the 50s.
Yeah, Frank did.
Yeah, crooners. A lot of the crooners hung around.
He had new songs. They didn't write them, but he had new songs in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, he had that "Strangers in the Night" went to #1.
Well, all the stuff with Nancy, like, New York was 77, I think.
Yeah, that was later in the 70s.
That was huge. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a massive track.
Other stuff.
And then
and I think you could find other smaller artists that had a little longevity after the 50s.
Well,
but look at the 20s, 30s, and 40s. There wasn't, there was styles, there was big band, there was swing, there was jazz, there was blues, but there wasn't a style that changed much. The 50s rock and roll.
Well, yeah,
really
there was.
Kind of put everything on its ear, and then the 60s took that and learned from it.
Yeah,
I don't even think I'll be honest. I think that really music's growth kind of stopped in the 60s.
Well,
only because the 70s didn't really give us that growth period.
I don't think it's fair to, and it doesn't matter because they're all dead now. But I don't think it's fair to dismiss music as far as being evolutionary or evolutionary or groundbreaking pre 1955. That's not fair.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying it wasn't. There were styles,
but no stars.
Big band, and you had big band stars. You had Glenn Miller. You had
racy.
Benny Goodman. You had styles, but they weren't. They were just what was there during the day.
Howie was there. He should tell us about it.
Tell us about the band leaders, Howie. I was Benny Goodman.
I was actually on tour. At the big.
I did lighting
with Bob Hope, doing lights and sound for them. So
USO tours, yeah, right.
USO.
No, and Brian, I'm not trying to be negative as much as I just think that ground zero of the 50s rock and roll, when it got a new name that we still use today, like outside of somebody like Brian Setzer, you don't use the term big band style swing very often. But when it comes to rock and roll, Bruce Springsteen the other day described himself as a rock and roller. I play rock and roll. Lemmy famously every night would say, we're Motorhead. We play rock and roll.
Yeah.
Rock and roll is a term that has been adopted since the mid-50s and is still going strong today. Yeah. There are rock and roll charts. There are rock and roll music.
Yeah.
I just think that the 20s, when you coming in, getting in and out of Prohibition and the Great Crash and this and that, music survived it, obviously. Entertainment thrived because people wanted to get away. But you just had background. Or it went to the movies. That was the channel. Elvis did the same thing. Oh, Glenn Miller's got a good band. Let's put him in a movie. Elvis can sing. Put him in a couple movies. That stopped with sort of after the Beatles because they did 2 movies on their own.
Well, the stars before 1955 were country stars. Like country was pop music.
Right.
For the most part. I mean, those were the names that you recognized. Those was like Little
Hank
Jimmy
Williams.
Dickens and Kitty Wells and people like that.
Hank Williams.
That I remember that I met. Oddly enough, another story for another day, but I knew.
Yeah, that's a story.
I've met these classic country people. I've met them. I've seen them perform. But it was country. It was rock and roll was country and R&B kind of merging together and doing something amazing, and we're still doing it. We're still doing it, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
But
I want to know. I want to know when in the 50s, and I think you can look at B.B. King. You can look at obviously Chuck Berry. You could even argue to look at Dwayne Eddy.
Yeah,
and that sort of vibe. I want to know when somebody first said, "You got to check out Robert Johnson," because Clapton has famously held a career based on.
Famously said it several times.
No Robert Johnson, no me. No Robert Johnson, no Chuck Berry.
Right.
No Jimi Hendrix, no Jimmy Page, no Jeff Beck. That whole lineage
Led Zeppelin
starts there. Well, and Led Zeppelin,
domino got to fall.
they might be one of the first. Howie, that's a great example. They might be one of the first times that the actual lyrics of a Robert Johnson song are word for word used again on Led Zeppelin tracks.
Exactly.
So they made no bones about where their history came from. I mean, Robin Trower has always said, if you like the way I play, don't listen to me, don't listen to Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to Albert King, listen to Freddie King, listen to Chuck Berry, listen to Eddie Cochran, listen to Leadbelly, listen to Sonny Joe Williams. Go back in the day and find out where it started. Same with Keith Richards. When he's at home sitting around, he's not listening to Prince, he's listening to Howlin' Wolf. And I think it's that love of music that's almost gone today, because I see so much electronics, so much pre-work, so much, Pro Tools and we'll fix it.
Well,
that I think they've lost that passion for. The reason I'm here is because this guy and a guitar made music back in 1929. And that's my genesis.
That brings us back to, hey, the concert was canceled because we forgot our computer with the backing track. What the heck?
Right,
what kind of excuse is that?
That shouldn't have to be.
Bruce said yesterday, every song I've ever written, these big 10-piece production pieces, I've always maintained one common thing. If I write a song, I should be able to sit down alone on a piano or a guitar and play it, and it should sound good. Because if it doesn't, then it's not a song I can take to the band.
Oddly enough, that kind of stuff I think was a given. And I'm not hating on any new music. I won't do it. I won't stand here and shake my fist and yell at the sky about it.
No, I'm not hating on it.
I'm not picking on you. I'm not picking on you. All I'm saying is
the feeling is gone. To me, in a lot of respects.
Right. I understand that.
That's just
what I will say is that I don't care what people do for art. I don't like to critique art a lot. What bothers me is when an art form takes over and consumes everything else, and when only one medium is available and it's just not that damn interesting. That I don't know if that makes sense to anybody or not, but
it does.
Do you mean like when Nirvana broke and all of a sudden Macy's
everything was Nirvana, everything was grunge.
Yeah. Everything was grunge.
Right.
That's when you know it's over. Right. It's over when the general populace knows your band is going backwards, not
then
forward.
How come we're still listening to hip hop?
I think because that's more of a movement that's constantly being revised,
but it's
constantly being retooled.
It's not progressing.
But I think it's progressing in some respects.
Artistically.
Nah.
It's just
it isn't.
It's almost there in spite of itself. And I don't care that it's.
But it speaks to the generations. My kids' hip hop that they really like isn't hip hop that I really like, but I can appreciate Logic and Eminem and other artists. And I'll listen to some of it and be like, okay, I get where this is coming from. But have you heard Run DMC? Have you heard Beastie Boys? Have you heard Kool Moe Dee? Have you heard this? And you see that disconnect of age where it's like being my dad saying to me, yeah, this Ted Nugent thing, well, I don't know. But here, have you heard George Shearing? And he plays George Shearing piano at the time. And I'm like, no, Dad, I like Aerosmith and Bad Company and Ted Nugent. And now here I am 40 years later going, damn, that George Shearing is one hell of a good keyboardist considering he was blind.
Well, let me get my thought out. Let me just get my thought out here before we got to wrap the show.
Okay.
What I was trying to say was, I don't mind that there's a band out there who has to cancel their tour because they lost their laptops. I'm fine with that. That's okay. There can be a band out there that loses their laptops and has to cancel a show.
Just lie next.
I tell you what I miss. I do miss this part though. I remember when to be a famous musician, to have a hit, to be somebody you wanted to go see in concert, you had to actually be able to play more talent than me.
Yes,
I miss that.
Yeah, I do too.
It's okay that the laptop guys are there too. They can be at the party, but they shouldn't just only be laptop guys at the party. There should be talent at the party too.
Yep. Or I think that's what MTV's Unplugged did, though, didn't it? Didn't that teach us? It did to the extent of they took a band and said, "Hey, you guys are great. Now, can you sit here in this room with 50 people around you and some candles with an acoustic guitar and do that?" The Nirvana Unplugged is moving. It's incredible. And here's Nirvana, a punk band, and their acoustic MTV Unplugged is one of the, if you've never seen it, Brian, I highly suggest you do.
I've seen all of it.
It's amazing.
It
really is.
It was
because great music comes through. I think.
Oh. Well, I wasn't watching MTV Unplugged like, wow, look, they can play without computers or whatever. I was watching it like, okay, here's really uninteresting folk versions of all of these songs. That's how I saw it.
Right. For Nirvana to make that work, they played Melvins and they played,
Bowie,
like Backwater, right? They were playing like stuff that wasn't their own. Just
but still, I mean, they
fiddle and
they interpreted a song. This, I will lay it out on this. One of the greatest covers of all time is Johnny Cash doing "Hurt" by Trent Reznor's Nine Inch Nails. Mm-hmm. Then I think that David Bowie, if he was alive today and you went up to him and said, "What did you think of Nirvana doing The Man Who Sold the Earth?" I think he would say, "It was moving, it was amazing, it was gorgeous, it was beautiful. It's what I wrote the song for." I don't think he would say, "Oh, it's just a folky version of my track."
Well, I'm a consumer. I'm not a musician. I mean, in that regard, I'm a musician.
No, I know, but I think at the same time, it's just a matter of we as fans of music suddenly somewhere in the 80s had to qualify our taste. We didn't in the 70s. In the 70s, you were like, "Man, I love the Eagles. Man, I love this. I love this." But the 80s came along and all of a sudden it became like a bad high school clique group. You had metalheads, you had pop heads, you had new wave and punk and this and this. And then we had you hanging out with Jeffrey Dahmer and Prince. And everybody had a different thing.
And sisters. I can tell you that there were cliques in the 70s. Yeah. My big sister, Cindy, who lives the one in Phoenix, she was a pop standard person. She liked Linda Ronstadt and David Cassidy and Neil Diamond.
I love the Partridge Family.
Partridge Family. And she was into that.
Osmonds. Yeah.
My brother, he was Zeppelin, Van Halen, Ted Nugent, anything rock he still is to this day. My other sister, she was more into what I would, at the time, not anymore. At the time, she was into things that I would consider more progressive, like Police, The Cars, early punk, Joan Armatrading, weird, anything weird and artsy.
Whatever happened to her? She was all over the map at one point, remember?
But it was very cliquey then. It was very cliquey then. There weren't many people that were driving around in, 71 Cuda, Emi Cudas, listening to, Casing the Sunshine Band at the time.
That was fun.
No. And
that wasn't a thing.
No, I get that click part, but it almost seems to me that the 80s, I remember the argument the first time I heard the term corporate rock about Journey and Styx and REO Speedwagon,
Kansas and
all those bands. That's corporate rock. And I'm like, have you really listened to Leftoverture? Because it's freaking amazing. Like, it's not corporate anything.
Yeah.
And but the more the 80s went on, the more you had to qualify. People would be like, "Hey, have you heard the new Police album, Synchronicity? It's amazing." No, it's not really. Why not? Why don't you? Like, people started getting into arguments about why they did or didn't like certain music. And I tried to stay under the radar of just like, dude, I'm loving all this.
I told them it's okay to like everything.
That was my
I like metal. I listen to Slayer and I listen to Run DMC. What's the problem?
Well, in all fairness, Jay, if anybody was being completely honest, the people who don't get real hung up on genre are musicians.
Oh yeah, no, they look at the music.
Real musicians appreciate and dig everything.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I'm sure
the art of it.
I'm sure there's a dude. There's a dude in Slayer who thinks that the harmonies that Barry and Robin Gibb produced were amazing. I'm sure there's a guy in that band who believes that.
Tom probably.
Carrie. They do. They may not talk about an interview, but if you know them, they're going to talk about that.
Carrie doesn't even like Ghost. Come on.
Carrie's just trying to stay relevant.
Yeah. Carrie's, you know, I've done
that this week. Yeah.
You know what I mean.
I've done Jaeger shots with Carrie at 3 a.m. at the Fireside Lounge at Peppermill in Vegas.
Paul McCartney has said nice things about Kanye West, which is more than I can say that I've done. And on that note,
he's waiting for the Nike deal where he'll get $2 billion.
Goodbye.
We'll see you next week. If John has us back, we'll see you next week.